Gagnon is coordinator for the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. He's just completed a long lecture tour on the West Coast. He brought his entire organization to Jeju Island, a place where there's an enormous tragedy going on because of building a base, and his whole organization went there. And he's going to be our first speaker.
Thank you. I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet if you'd like to get on the Global Network mailing list, either email and or address. So I'll pass that around too.
Sorry. You want to move over?
But anyway, let me start this around. Basically, I want to make the point that declining resources around the Earth are driving fundamentally the foreign and military policy of the United States and NATO today. Resource extraction of declining resources, I believe, is the primary mission of the U.S. Pentagon today and NATO. The Pentagon today is the biggest polluter on the planet, with the biggest carbon footprint on the planet. And the Pentagon and NATO today are essentially the military arm of corporate globalization. Just to illustrate this point about the Pentagon being used as and NATO being used as a resource extraction service, I want to use the example of Canada, that has just made the decision to appropriate $35 billion to build more warships. It's the biggest single line item appropriation in the history of Canada. And so why is Canada building all of these warships? What's the reason for it? What's driving it? What's behind it? Well, all you have to do is look at a map. And you look just north of Canada and you see the Arctic region, right? And now because of climate change, with the melting of ice, is fair game for the oil and natural gas exploration corporations. But there's a conflict up in the Arctic regions, and it's that Russia has a vast territory in the Arctic. And so the United States is now enlisting Canada and Norway and other NATO allies in the push and shove that is a competition that is going to be coming for control, military control of the Arctic region, so that the resource extraction process can be controlled by capitalism. And so I believe that this is just one example to show how this whole dynamic linked to climate change, resource extraction of declining resources around the planet, is what it's really all about. We had a very interesting discussion and explanation about NATO's war on Libya today, but one thing I didn't hear mentioned that I think is an important factor is that Libya has the largest supply of oil on the African continent. And isn't it very likely that the reason why the US and NATO went into Libya was, again, to serve as the primary resource extraction service on behalf of corporate globalization. And so we're hearing now, not only from our friends in Canada and the peace movement, but from our friends in virtually all the other NATO countries, they're saying that the goal is to reduce social spending in those countries and to expand military spending, as NATO becomes, as was well explained earlier, this kind of cancerous growth on steroids, a military arm all over the world now, as it's reaching out to even countries in the Asia-Pacific, developing partnerships with Australia, Japan, South Korea, etc., on down the line. A key element in all of this NATO expansion, then, is this missile defense system, so-called missile defense system, what our friends in Korea call missile offense, what our friends in England have been calling missile offense for some time. The U.S. is now, under the Obama administration, expanding this so-called missile defense system to encircle Russia and China. In the case of Russia, the Obama administration, when it came into office, announced that they were not going to deploy Bush's version of missile defense, and instead they were going to deploy a different version of missile defense. Bush's version was a Boeing Lockheed Martin program that was all about hitting a bullet with a bullet way up in deep space. Obama's version is a General Dynamics Corporation version that is more about getting closer to the so-called offending nation, so that when they launch their nuclear weapons, you can hit them earlier. You don't have to wait till they get way up in deep space. You hit them earlier in their boost phase or in their initial launching. And so today, the Obama administration is now deploying so-called missile defense systems in Poland. It's going to put them in Romania, put a missile defense radar in Turkey, and they're negotiating with other countries. And one of the key reasons of this meeting here in Chicago is to get the commitment of all 28 NATO members to officially support this missile defense system, make it Europe-wide, which means that as NATO expands into the old former Warsaw Pact countries, that they move missile defense even closer to Russia. In fact, you know, NATO is now expanded into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and many other countries within the former Warsaw Pact. As it turns out, you might say, why? First of all, why did Obama make this decision not to deploy the Boeing Lockheed Martin version, instead going with General Dynamics? As it turns out, General Dynamics, at the time of the 2008 election, was owned by the Crown family of Chicago, who gave Obama $500,000 in his race for president. They were the majority stockholders in General Dynamics in 2008 at the time of the election. And in fact, they raised money for Obama within the military-industrial complex across the country. And so after the election was over, Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine reported that Obama received more campaign donations from the military-industrial complex than the right-wing Republican war hawk John McCain did. So I would submit to you that one reason that Obama went with General Dynamics Corporation version of missile defense is a political payback to that corporation for their support in helping make him president of the United States. General Dynamics is putting missile defense systems on Navy Aegis warships, Aegis destroyers, that are built in at Bath Iron Works, where I live in Bath, Maine. And so Obama is now going to deploy these as land-based systems and as sea-based systems in the Mediterranean and in the Baltic and Black Seas in the coming years. So this encirclement of Russia is full bore now under the Obama administration. Why though does the U.S. want to encircle Russia? Does Obama want to restart the Cold War and a new arms race with Russia? Why? Could it be because Russia has the world's largest supply of natural gas and significant supplies of oil? Could that be a factor? Indeed, I think it is. At the same time, Obama is increasing the encirclement of China by the Pentagon. Just a couple months ago, he announced a pivot of U.S. foreign and military policy into the Asia-Pacific, and they're now deploying these missile defense systems in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Japan, just recently in Okinawa, and again on these Navy Aegis warships being ported throughout the region. And in fact, this is where Jeju Island in South Korea comes into play. The U.S. is twisting the arm of the South Korean government, getting them to build a Navy base on Jeju Island, which is only 300 miles from the mainland of China, giving the U.S. a very strategic port in this process of encirclement of China. And why would the U.S. want to encircle China? Why do we want to start an arms race with China? Why do we want to do that? Well, I think the Pentagon has acknowledged that the U.S. is not going to be able to compete economically with China, but if we can control their access to resources in the coming period, oil, other resources to fuel their economy, then we will hold the key to their economic engine. And I think that's what this strategy is really all about. So as a consequence, what happens? Russia is now saying that if the U.S. continues with these missile defense deployments around Russia, that they are going to have to pull out of the New START treaty. It was in and of itself a very modest treaty. It only had very modest reductions in nuclear weapons, but Russia is saying that if you're going to put missile defense around us, we can't reduce the number of nuclear weapons we have, because obviously MD systems are part of U.S. first strike strategy, and they can't afford to lower their numbers of nuclear weapons. China is already has now purchased 4 or 5 or built 4 or 5 nuclear submarines in order to take their only 20-some nuclear missiles that are capable of hitting the west coast of the United States, taking them off land where they're very vulnerable and putting them on the submarines where they would be more survivable. This will only accelerate an arms race with the United States in the coming period. So all of our groups, I would suggest to you, need to increasingly connect the dots between declining resources and competition, superpower competition over declining resources, with a war for, endless war as the Pentagon and NATO job becomes primary resource extraction service for corporate globalization. Climate change, the implications there. Neo-feudalism, the destruction of social progress around the world in order to fund this growing militarization so that they can control the declining resources in this coming period, and attacks on our civil liberties. All these dots have to be connected if we're going to hope that the public can begin to really put this picture together and really understand how it all is coming about and where it's going. Finally, what's the solution to all of this? I firmly believe one of the key solutions remains calling for the conversion of the military-industrial complex. Instead of building weapons for endless war, building technologies that even in a small way help us solve for the coming realities of climate change. Just one illustration, University of Massachusetts and Amherst Economics Department study in December of 2011 that looked at $1 billion of military spending. And they said, yes, it's true, you spend that $1 billion on military production, you create 8,600 jobs for every $1 billion. But they said you take that same $1 billion and you put it into building a national rail system connecting every corner of the country in the United States, and with that same $1 billion, you create 19,675 jobs. Just imagine that, 8,600 jobs building weapons for endless war, or 19,675 jobs building a rail system to get us out of our gas-guzzling cars, to reduce the need to go to war for oil, and help it, again, in a small way, solve for climate change. So this is the vision that I think we need to offer to the public who is job scared and job worried today. Offer them a way out of this picture of endless war that we're in today. Thank you very much. I'd like to pass around newsletters here from our organization. And there's a sign-up sheet. I'd like to keep it going around if we could.
Oh, I was passing it to you. You already got it. You already got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are so fortunate to have somebody that knows so much about this here with us.
Oh, I did get one.